Kia Rio 3, I must say right away that when choosing a Kia Rio 3, you cannot particularly bother with the choice of engine. The difference in acceleration dynamics between 1.4 and 1.6 is minimal, and the technical differences between these two motors are so negligible that it is simply impossible to determine the unit outwardly. You can't see the crankshaft, but you can't see the connecting rods indiscriminately. Not everyone can decipher the engine model on the sticker, which, in fact, is used by many scammers who sell 1.4 under the guise of 1.6, in the hope that the buyer simply does not look at the right column in the TCP. And it's very easy to miss. The resource of both engines is also practically the same. Even despite the fact that the manufacturer claims a mileage limit of 180 tkm, in practice, the piston engines of both engines travel at least 230 tkm, and with a responsible approach to maintenance, all 300,000 kilometers in short, the Rio loves a good 95 gas and an oil change every 10 km. Before their last days, the units may require you not very expensive, but still attention. For example, by 100,000, and unscheduled, I would even say, unexpected replacement of an extended chain and quite a routine adjustment of valve clearances may be needed. The catalytic converter also crumbles to this point in order, and the risk of crumbs being drawn into the combustion chamber increases, which caused premature wear of the piston for a number of owners. At the first sign of a loss of traction and an error in the efficiency of the catalyst, you will have to take care of removing it and flashing the ECU, or an expensive replacement of the converter, otherwise you can spend even more. The Kia Rio 3 engines are not very picky about the climate. However, the units are painful when the aero drops to -20. They do not always start, especially with a standard battery. One way or another, you can warm up the car and there is no risk of breakdown, which cannot be said about the tendency of Rio motors to overheat. In our Urals, this is rare, but in the regions to the south they complain that if the radiator is not flushed every season, then the risks of frying the engine increase many times over. The cooling system is already designed end-to-end, and then there's dirt, bent radiator cells, and insects that interfere with heat transfer and reduce reliability. Oil leaks disturb Rio units extremely rarely. Sometimes they snot only the front crankshaft oil seal and the valve cover. Do not strain your head too much for applicants for a used Kia Rio 3 and with a choice of gearbox. If you want an automatic, take it, you will not regret it. There are almost no problems with hydromechanics if you periodically change the oil, but when buying a used Rio, it is better to check the mechanical box thoroughly, switching all gears during a test drive. The weak point of the transmission is the third speed synchronizer. If you hear a crunch when you turn it on, then look for another car or ask for an appropriate discount on the capital of the checkpoint. Up to 150 tkm there are almost no clutch problems if you use it properly. Some pass even 200,000 with a native clutch, largely due to the delay valve for smooth switching, which helps the driver not to burn the basket and kill the gearbox ahead of time. The resource of the chassis of the Kia Rio does not raise any questions. The behavioral features are more disturbing. There were so many complaints from angry owners who almost lost control on the track due to two soft rear shock absorbers, allowing the stern to sway from side to side, accompanying loss of control. They live long enough, there are no questions about this. That's just the desire to change them to more hard non-original ones arises almost immediately after buying a car, which is what the owners of Rio Solaris are doing. Let's return to the reliability of the chassis. The weak point in the suspension, perhaps, is the front wheel bearings. They begin to backlash after 30 to 40 tkm. Just don't be in a hurry to replace them. It is possible that you can get by with tightening the fastening nut and travel at least the same amount. Stabilizer bushings are in second place. Their resource is approximately 100 tkm. The silent blocks of the front levers on the third 130 to 150 tkm. The ball ones are practically not killed. They calmly hold on to 250 tkm each. Front shock absorbers fully work on average the first 100,000 kilometers. Nothing ever happens to the rear beam, which was initially clear even when getting acquainted with the design, if such a simple device can be called that. Breakdowns are excluded. Steering, unfortunately, I can't praise in any ways fastidious. Even if we discard the cases of early leaks of power steering pumps, which were eliminated under warranty, then there is still something to complain about. For example, the steering rack. One gets the feeling that the manufacturers conspired and buy the steering assembly from one supplier, which in turn completes the mechanism with low-quality guide bushings. In the case of Rio, knocks can be heard after 40 TkM. The only thing that pleases is the maintainability, which is inherent in all the mechanisms of the model. So the rail can be silenced relatively inexpensively. The main thing is to find a good specialized service. Despite a fairly productive power steering system, one day Rio May 3rd puzzled the owner with a tight steering wheel. You should not worry too much about this, because the weak point is eliminated simply and corny by lubricating the cardan of the steering shaft. The most important thing is not to delay the solution of the problem, otherwise, after the loss of the amplification effect, the knocks of a worn cross will still appear, because of which the latter will only have to be changed. Steering tips safely live up to 100,000 kilometers, and then it will depend on the accuracy of the driver and the operating conditions of the car. The paintwork of the Kia Rio, which is expected for a budget car, is weak and does not like absolutely any contact. It is easily scratched, from which it is already difficult to call a car fresh from an aesthetic point of view by a mileage of 100 TkM. The same can be said about the windshield, which is not distinguished by resistance to rubbing. Over time, Rio, like Solaris, increases the gaps between the front bumper and adjacent body panels. True aesthetes have to change the clips. Sweating headlights are also a popular phenomenon and are not so much a concern for design as for an already not very productive lighting system. Rio also has sores that are easier to cure yourself than to buy new parts or give money to bottomless currency-absorbing dealers. I'm talking, of course, about the door stops. So weak that they almost completely stop fixing positions by 50 TkM, and the owners have to modify them with a metal rod, which is usually used as an electrode for welding. In general, when determining the mileage by indirect signs, you will have to take this moment into account so as not to boo the seller in vain, accusing him of twisting. It won't be fair. By the way, the mileage here is not duplicated in any of the ECU units, which means that the tricks of scammers by electronic methods cannot be calculated with computer diagnostics. It is better to evaluate the car completely and only after that make a decision about the reality of the numbers on the odometer. It is also worth taking into account that the interior of the Kia Rio itself is not the most wear-resistant. The seats, steering wheel, gearshift lever are overwritten earlier than you expect from them. This is how, for example, some elements of the interior look after 100,000 kilometers, plus, stains remain from every spilled drop of water. Crickets settle in panels almost from the first kilometers, and by the first 100 of their populations, they insist on a full-fledged sizing of plastic with some kind of anti-creak. The most important thing during operations with the panel is not to overdo it with palpation. The plastic is fragile, especially for air duct deflectors. Otherwise, the Rio Salon does not annoy with breakdowns. At least, there are not so many pronounced weaknesses. The heating thread of one of the front seats may burn out, the trip button may fail, which is familiar from old Kia Hyundai models. Pre-styling versions send with the appearance of cracks in the rearview mirrors when their heating was turned on. Many owners are not happy with the airflow and ventilation system. Only turning on the air conditioner helps the windows that always fog up in the rain, which must be filled with Freon before every summer and the condenser thoroughly cleaned of dirt, otherwise the efficiency will noticeably decrease from year to year. When buying, be sure to check the engine number. If the number does not match the TCP data, definitely refuse to buy, since no one can guarantee that the unit has not migrated here from one of the tens of thousands of stolen cars. And in general, the verification of forensic markings should be taken with special responsibility so as not to run into legal problems. There are no weighty arguments to dissuade from any specific configuration and equipment. Take it with any engine and, preferably, with a mileage of up to 150 TkM, so that you can drive for several years without capital investments. As you probably already understood, Kia Rio can be safely bought on the used car market, but this should be done with extreme caution. It's very easy to make a mistake. Also, like any other liquid model, taxi drivers and resellers love the Rio, which means that the market is full of squeezed-out options with twisted mileage, which are most often set at lower prices. In order to determine the average market value, you will have to look at many cars. Finally, during the work managed to see a lot of beaten Rio. I think it will be useful to know that the inscription on the panel of the passenger airbag should look like in option 1. 2 and 3 broken cars with blown up front airbags. Don't get burned.